Back on Buckeye Talk, I asked our tech subscribers, and if you're not a tech subscriber, uh, why not join up in the summer? 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial. And I think right now, anytime is a good time to sign up, but start thinking about signing up maybe later in July. You get around the Big Ten Media Days, get a couple of weeks free right there that leads you into summer preseason camp and finding out what's going on with position battles and as those finish up and things like that. Just a thing to keep in the back of your mind if you're not already a tech subscriber. But for those who are, I asked them two simple questions just to kind of take the temperature of where the fan base stands right now, or this segment of the fan base as it pertains to recruiting. I asked on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being worst, 10 being best, what is your opinion of Ohio State's offensive recruiting for 2024 and beyond? So a scale of 1 to 10, Stephen, what do you think the score was?
I'd say about an 8.5, and the thing that knocked it was the offensive line recruiting.
So 8.66, you were very close. Yeah. There were as many 9. 9 was the most popular answer, and as many 9s as were 8s and 10s combined. So that's telling you how many of our responses were all converged around the top 3 answers there. So I think that is actually a pretty strong response when you consider, as you said, the offensive line recruiting. And then one other thing that somebody brought up, I'm going to read real quick. Hey guys, for the survey, I wanted to give some context. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm underwhelmed by the offensive haul so far. Shouldn't OSU be the best location for the best QB? Yet they didn't hold on to Dylan Raiola. Thanks. That was Robbie from Canton. So that's like one other thing that maybe is factoring in here, that people see a potential stray from Ohio State's getting the best at all costs. I think Aaron Oland is certainly more than a consolation prize at quarterback. And I think we should, rather than going down that road, like the naysayers, the more important thing here is how strong people actually see on the recruiting side of the ball, whether that's the receivers that are in this class and other classes, some of the other positions. The offensive recruiting remains pretty robust.
Yeah, with the quarterback thing, I mean, they've landed the number 1 quarterback twice, and it's gotten weird both times. So I don't know if that's the best thing for Ohio State's quarterback recruiting to go after number one like that. But I mean, they've got the top receiver in the country, and who I think, regardless of position, is the best player in the country in Jeremiah Smith. Mylan Graham, I think, is the best route runner of all the wide receivers, period. I've gotten a chance to see him in person a couple of times here. I mean, James Peoples, quality running back. Jordan Lyle, a decent number 2 there. You've already mentioned Aaron Nolan in that situation. I think Ian Moore, man, seeing him camp a couple of times this year, that dude looks like he has some first-round potential there. And I don't think I was thinking about him that way 6 months ago. So I think that's a kid. I think he's starting to be a little bit underrated in the composite one, because they still have him listed as an interior offensive lineman when he's coming here to play tackle. But listen, that's not my job. That's the people at 247 Sports job. But I really liked what I saw from Ian Moore. So just from an offensive standpoint, you start there. That's quality. It doesn't seem as loud as it has been in the past, but that's because the offensive recruiting has been wrapped up for so long that it's more about, okay, what's the defense going to do? What's the defense going to do? Great segue by me, by the way.
Yeah, I want to talk about Ian Moore again in a little bit. But on the defensive side of things, I asked the same question. Scale of 1 to 10, worst to best. What's your opinion of Ohio State's defensive recruiting? What do you think the average score was?
Right, sure. 6 and rising.
6.77. So almost a 7, like trending up towards a 7. And I thought, like you, that it might be a little bit lower. It went all the way up to 10. We did have a couple of 10 and 9 votes, but 7 was by far the most popular answer. And then more 8s than 6s. So really, this surprised me a little bit. And our text audience is not typically as reactionary or overreactionary as maybe you'll see on Twitter and some fan bases at large. But I still thought that they would maybe ding them more for some of the misses there. But what you got to remember, I guess, is you've got CJ Hicks here. You've got Sonny Styles here. You've got Kenyatta Jackson. You've got some other recent recruiting wins that are starting to show up on the field. And I wonder if this number might have been lower in January than it is now that we've gone through spring and they've started to see some of the recent defensive recruiting potentially pay off as soon as this fall.
I think if we did this last summer, the exact same thing, It might have been like a 3 or a 4, quite honestly with you. And I think I think it'd been like a 2 if we'd have done it in December around signing day. I think there's some optimism, and a lot of that has been led on by guys like myself who tell fans they should be optimistic that things are going to be better than they were a year ago. Because if you really think about it, defensive recruiting is in the exact same spot that it was. We're recording this on June 26th. Last year, June 26, 2022, they're in the exact same spot. We're coming off of the last round of official visits, and it feels like there are some 5 stars in the SEC country where Ohio State's got a really good chance and you can feel comfortable about it. And you didn't win any of them. 6 months passed and you lost. You struck out on every single one of those. And so it's like, okay, what happened here? Why'd you strike out on anybody? And it felt more like an NIL thing than a recruiting problem. And if you understand what I'm getting at there, this new element came into play and Ohio State wasn't fully prepared for how much of an impact it was going to have. And so if it feels like this time around, Ohio State has solved its NIL problem, I'm putting that in quotations for the people who are listening and not watching on YouTube, because we have, they have a plan. It's time to see if the plan works or not. Then there's a reason to think that this year's version of Caleb Downs, Keon Keeley, Mark Fletcher, Damon Wilson, Can Lee, continue the list going, because it's not just about 5 stars. Those are some of those guys I mentioned are in the 200s. If it doesn't feel like the NIL is going to hold you back this year, you can feel confident about the 2024 versions of those guys. Not saying you're going to bat 100 or 1,000, excuse me, but can you bat 40%? Can you bat, 50%? And that's why I said 6 and rising, because it's like, I believe in it, but I still want to see some payoff, because right now I feel like I'm being put on the hook and I want to actually see results this time around before I just get all the way excited about it. So this could be a 9 in December on signing day, or they could also go right back down to a 2.
We're going to get a little bit into that again in the third segment, but let's talk about who Ohio State has already landed for 2024, at least has commitments for 2024, that is maybe shaping these opinions that our text subscribers have right now. So I gave you, I think, 5 categories, asked you to pick up a name for each of these. So I'm going to start with just a, and you can define this however you want.
Yep.
Most important commitment so far in this 2024 class.
Bryce West.
And why?
In-state dude from a school you historically have had a great relationship with at a position of need. He just checks off way too many boxes where he's not the most talented. Right now, he's the 4th highest rated guy, but the highest rated defensive guy. But, top 50 dude in your backyard at a position where, quite frankly, you just need to keep loading up talent to get as far away from what the past 4 years have been like as possible. So he's been the most important target even before you got guys like Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham involved. Him being committed, he now becomes the most important commitment.
Obviously, you talked about him a lot already, so moving right along. So the biggest win so far, which I think is different maybe than what the most important commitment is, because there are different levels of battle. Sometimes the highest rated guys in your class can be among some of the easiest to land because they're in-state guys, or you just have the early connection and you won it outright. What's the biggest win so far?
So I had 2 guys for this segment because I wanted to give one the offense and one the defense. I picked Mylan Graham over Jeremiah Smith for the offense because Jeremiah Smith just feels like the Chase Young to Brian Hartline's Larry Johnson, where he spent years and years building up to this, and now it's time to cash in the chips, and he did. So that was a build-up for me. Mylan Graham is more important because Brian Hartline was first. Mylan camped last summer. Nobody knew who he was. I don't even think he had a 247 composite recruiting profile at that point. He came in, tore it up, earned an offer, and from that point on, it was out the gate for him. Everybody else kind of followed. But Hartline was first to the punch, and that never didn't matter. and it eventually resulted in a commitment 9 months later, and he's a 5-star recruit. And as I mentioned, I think he's the best route runner in the class and a guy that by year 2 should be contributing to this team. So just to see that payoff is what I think makes it so important, because we talk about it all the time. Hartline gets in early and picks his guys early, and then he moves on to the next class. This is a prime example of a dude where it's like, I got in early. I don't care what he's ranked. I don't care who else knows what he is. And then once again, the Brian Hartline stamp pays off because now he's a 5-star recruit. And that is, I could probably say that. That's the number 20 player and the number 6 wide receiver in the class, one of the 6 5-stars. And then on defense, Peyton Pierce, number 170 player, number 16 linebacker. And it's important because do you think James Laurinaitis can be the Brian Hartline of the defense? Here's your proof. I've said it on multiple pods. Ohio State wasn't really involved with this kid until James Laurinaitis showed up, because this kid was probably headed to Notre Dame because James Laurinaitis was a GA there. He came to Ohio State, so did all that momentum for Peyton Pierce, and I think it's a great sign for what can happen if we ever get to the point where James Laurinaitis is an actual assistant coach who can leave and go recruit. Because even now, when these recruits are here, it's James Laurinaitis walking them around on tours. It's James Laurinaitis who they're spending time with. And it's not saying that Jim Knowles isn't involved, but as I've said, since he's gotten hired, he didn't get hired to recruit. He got hired here because they needed to improve the defense. So having a guy like James Laurinaitis be able to recruit at a high level, if he ever becomes an assistant coach, Peyton Pierce is just a taste of what he might be able to get down the line. And maybe in 2 or 3 years, if he is the assistant coach, he's getting his version of what Jeremiah Smith and Chase Young were for Brian Hartline and Larry Johnson.
Most underrated commit so far?
Ian Moore, just because I think he's a first-round talent down the line here. And I think that they still need to go lock in some of the offensive tackles, which we'll get into when we start talking about the class prediction here. But I think this kid can be your maybe right tackle if Aaron Nolan's your starting quarterback because he's left-handed. But I think this guy can be your money tackle position. And I think there's some first-round potential that's not necessarily being acknowledged by most recruiting sites.
Ian Moore, number 118 overall player per the 24/7 composite, but also, like you said before, someone that Ohio State and a lot of other people consider him a tackle. He's not listed as a tackle there. And I actually kind of wondered if, as you said before, the people who are like dinging Ohio State for the offensive line recruiting, if you don't realize that is actually maybe them trying to address that position with him, then maybe that factors into although you brought it up a few times, so that's still kind of hanging out there in the balance. But a guy from Indiana, that's obviously Justin Fry's sort of hometown backyard area too. I would think that if there were big-time recruits coming out of there for the offensive line, and Ohio State's landed a few in the past few years, including a guy that started last year, was an NFL draft pick, and DeJuan Jones, and a guy that they're expecting to start this year in Josh Fryer, that pipeline should continue to be pretty strong over some of the other Big Ten competition in that state. The toughest ongoing fight to keep a player will be blank.
I think there's no good answer to this, because I think right now there's not a guy who's currently in the class where you're worried about him flipping. The closest to that was probably Sam Williams-Dixon a couple of weeks ago, the number 730 player, the number 76 athlete, who's going to come here to start out as a running back, but it's not a guarantee he sticks at that position. He could end up at a bunch of different places, but because he's coming in as a running back, he's the 3rd running back in a class. And there was a couple of weeks ago where he took a visit to Kentucky, and nobody knew he was taking a visit to Kentucky. And that's not a good – there's nothing wrong with taking – well, obviously no coach would – when you commit, they'd rather you not take visits, but that's not living in the real world. So the happy medium is at least tell us about it. At least tell us you're going, and nobody knew he was going. Now, that's been figured out at this point, so it's not that big of an issue, but that's probably the closest anybody has been to actually – being in a situation where it's like, maybe he doesn't make it to signing day. That can change as some more of these defensive players come along. But for right now, there's no real answer to that. It's just every couple of weeks, we're going to have to write the Jeremiah Smith isn't going anywhere. Stop paying attention anytime somebody tries to hype up somebody else post.
And to lead us into this third segment, the biggest positional need still unfilled, and more than the candidates. We'll talk about the candidates in a bit, but maybe talk about the roster composition that makes it such, and the preceding signing class that just got here, that maybe is the factor in why a certain position still has the biggest need.
Yeah, having Bryce West locked in and what it feels like by Miles Lockhart coming along here very soon here moves cornerback off of that number one spot in my mind, and it moves defensive line to number one with a gap between them and everybody else because I think it's the only position that doesn't have a commitment yet right now. And that could very soon be changing here in the coming weeks as well. But as of right now, it's the only position without a commitment. And Larry Johnson is coming off of a cycle where he struck out. Jason Moore, quality top 100 recruit. Caden McDonald, quality guy who I think could be a force there. Maybe have some Talik Williams moments in terms of flashing as a freshman this year, but no 5-star edge rusher, no 5-star defensive end. And we're coming into a year where this is probably JT Tuimoloau's last year. And I don't know, could Jack Sawyer go crazy? And this could also be his last year. So you're going to watch 2-5. You're already kind of low on depth, if we're being honest here, in terms of defensive end here, because JT's really the only one with a lot of experience. Jack has a little bit, but not crazy amount. And then Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, and Amari Abor just didn't do anything last year because they were true freshmen. So you're asking them to really step up this year. So you're in a situation where you already don't have a lot of experience in terms of depth. You might lose 2, and so you only have 3. And your 2 you're going to lose are 2 guys who are 2 of the top 5 players in their recruiting class. That's raw talent you need to replace. And you didn't do that in 2023, striking out on Keon Keeley, Mateo Uyunglele, and Damon Wilson. You need to make up for that. And I'm not saying you need to go out there and get 3 5-stars, but you probably need to get a 5-star, another top 100 recruit, and then another quality guy to go along with that, plus the interior.
Yeah, I mean, Caden Curry played probably the closest to like what you would expect. That was sort of like a normal true freshman workload. You got some moments. It was really 4th or 5th in that rotation. But yeah, I think I would agree with what you're saying, is that being still the biggest need. And this was one of our text responses, to go back to where I said before, it was about whatever it was, 6.77 as the texter average score. Here was one response. I voted a 7 on defense, but it's going to hang highly on this class. In my opinion, they have to land Scott. That was Aaron Scott, who we were talking before, the cornerback, and a big-time DL recruit. If they fail to do this, I'll say it's a 4 at best. And that seems like an extreme swing, but I think kind of get, by the Ohio State standard, what some of these texters might be saying, which is if you can't land those big-time guys, then your class doesn't separate enough from the other people in the Big Ten that you're trying to beat.
Especially at that position where, I mean, the trenches has kind of been the issue in some ways or another over the last couple of years here. Plus, I can't even remember the last time Ohio State's roster didn't have at least 1 5-star defensive lineman on it. And depending on what happens with JT and Jack, that may be the case in 2024 if you don't land somebody big in this class.
So let's talk about who else they're going to land in this class when we come back from this break on Buckeye Talk.